The journey is the real benefit, not always just the final outcome. And I just get worried about the fact that if we're so outcome driven all the time as opposed to process driven, that we may lose something along the way, even in scenarios where we make mistakes that end up being some of the greatest miracles of our time.
Hey, Uncommon Leaders, welcome back. This is the Uncommon Leader Podcast. I'm your host, John Gallagher. Got a great guest for us today to listen into. A little bit different conversation than we used to, but I know we can tie it back into leadership. KERIM KFURI is going to talk to us about his book, Supply Chain Ups and Downs. And we're going to take the path of tying that to leadership and what that means, frankly, to us, both in our business as well as in our personal lives as well, and talk about some of the things that he's been through on his journey and passion for supply chain. But before we jump into that, let me do a little introduction so that you all know a little bit about him. A global entrepreneur who's the president and CEO of the Atlas Network, a global supply chain enterprise offering comprehensive end-to-end supply chain services. And I'm going to let him talk about what that really means to us as we go forward. He's also the founder and host of the Supply and Demand Show, which is a YouTube podcast that is out there, and also the author of the best-selling book, Supply Chain Ups and Downs, that I mentioned at the very start here. So congratulations on that bestseller status. And what I'm really interested in as we go through is he's a self-proclaimed continuous learner pursuing equilibrium in thought, culture, business practices, and amongst people. So KERIM KFURI, welcome to the Uncommon Leader Podcast. How you doing today?
Thank you so much, John. What a nice introduction. I really appreciate it, and happy to be with you and to have a nice conversation.
I think we're going to have a great conversation, but I am going to start you off just like I start every first-time guest on the Uncommon Leader Podcast. I'm going to ask you to tell me a story from your childhood that still impacts who you are as a person or as a leader today.
Right. Well, I mean, I would say that it really starts with blueberries, if you want to say.
Okay.
When I was a kid, we had a lot of blueberry bushes in the neighborhood. And, I think one day I was walking around and I said, hey, I enjoy pulling these blueberries down off of the bush and enjoying them. And I wonder if a bunch of other people would like this as well. And so, I started off by just kind of picking a bunch of them and giving them to neighbors and sort of friends, and everybody, kind of loved this. And then I said, you know what? Why don't I just kind of do what is the, current version of a lemonade stand? And let's just make like a little thing on the side of the road here and just kind of sell blueberries to people that are, coming on by and, want to, have something that was, something good to eat and enjoy. And that was the beginning of sort of my entrepreneurship journey, really. It was that understanding of, there's a product here and there's a demand and a supply, and people would like to play into the fact that they're giving some cute, 7-year-old kid some blueberries and some finances for these and so forth. And that was kind of a beginning, because you start making signs, and then you start having other friends in the neighborhood running around and trying to spread the word. And this is marketing and this is advertising. And, you need a price that makes sense so that when someone comes along and wants to buy one blueberry, you can't charge them $100, and price sensitivities. And, it's just, that was the beginning, I think, really for me at a very early age, just understanding the basics of kind of like business and really just entrepreneurship. And that journey just continued on for me through so many different points in my life with different things that I did. And some of them were about interests, and some hobbies, and some were business, and then obviously ultimately to international business and supply chain and all the things that I do today. But it all comes back to that 7-year-old kid who had blueberries and wanted to sell them. So.
Love that. It starts in so many different ways like that, or that entrepreneurship journey, no doubt about it. Some folks will have a paper route that they'll go through. Some will have a lawn mowing cutting service. You started with blueberries.
That's
We
right.
all have to start somewhere as we get on that journey. So I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm sure that you had to worry even at 7 years old about the supply chain of blueberries yourself as well. So before we jump into your book, because that's going to be exciting again, and tying that to leadership, let's put it down on the lower shelf for folks, for some of the listeners who really have an understanding of supply chain, no doubt about it, as leaders, but certainly not at the level you do with your decades of experience in that space. You tell a little story in Instagram about the the cup of coffee and the supply chain that exists there. So I love my cup of coffee. I have a newsletter called the Champions Brew that comes out every Friday that you can sip a cup of coffee with. So tell me, what supply chain is as it relates to maybe just a cup of coffee and some of the complexity there that exists and
Well,
why
I
it's so
mean,
expensive.
absolutely. I mean, just like any agricultural product, I mean, there are so many touch points that have to basically come about for you to end up having that cup of coffee that you're enjoying today, right? You've got obviously the ability to have farming. You have to have good natural conditions. You need labor to pick the beans, to dry them, to roast them, to then crush them, to import them from other countries, which, includes getting on vessels and crossing the ocean and paying tariffs and duties. As we know, recently in the news today, there was a whole conversation around, nations such as Mexico and otherwise that, have some of these agricultural products where there could be a 25% tariff put onto these kinds of things. So, aspects of just kind of global economics and political shifts that can impact that cup of coffee or really any products that we look to digest or take in from other parts of the world. And then in the end, when it gets here, it gets, packed or repacked into packaging and then is marketed by a brand or a company so that in the end of the day, it ends up on your store shelves. And then everybody needs a little part of the equation there, right? The supermarkets need their little part of the equation for having the shelf space and the distributors who got it to those supermarkets, and then the consumer, and there's a markup and so on and so forth. So really, when you think about that voyage to have that cup of coffee in front of you, it's quite intensive and probably involves hundreds or maybe even thousands of people to really kind of bring it to your doorstep. And, from where it originally started, some kind of an agricultural product on maybe a far part of the world, either from Africa or Hawaii or wherever, coffee beans, come from in different places, Guatemala and so forth, to end up being, as simple as something that we wake up to and enjoy every single day that had so many steps along the pathway to get there.
We don't think about that when we're looking at that cup of coffee in the morning that's coming through the coffee pot. Just as I listen to it, then I'm simply amazed even that we can get one for, unfortunately too expensive at a Starbucks or a Dunkin' for $3.49 for a cup of flavored water that comes
Correct.
out of a machine, no doubt about it. So there are some complexities, and you wonder, and that's just coffee. I mean, the many millions of items are handled through supply chain. And, frankly, it's good that an entrepreneur like you became passionate about that because we need folks who are passionate and strong in many different areas, and supply chain is one of them. So you've written this book, Supply Chain Ups and Downs.
Yes.
After years, after decades of supply chain experience, why did you write this book now, and who did you write it for?
Well, I don't have a lot of hair on my head. And the reason why that is because I've been in the trenches for a few decades now, dealing with sort of the ups and downs, if you want to call it, of this industry. And it is a very, very complex industry that revolves around sort of foreseeable obstacles, unforeseeable obstacles. The most consistent factor of the supply chain is inconsistency. It literally is inconsistency. And there's so many elements that need to be consistently balanced between the relationships of the various links in the supply chain, whether you're a consumer or you're a supplier or you're in the logistics space or customs clearance, delivery, warehousing, fulfillment. I mean, there's so many aspects to this industry. And the reason why I wrote it is because two things. One, during the pandemic, people didn't have things when they needed them. And when prices were
Hmm.
skyrocketing through the roof, nobody really understood why. And you can go around to any store right now, and when there isn't something on the shelf, somebody walks along and says supply chain. They may not even understand what they're even talking about or what that means, but it's become common vernacular. And there's a huge information gap around what it is, why it's important, and so forth. And so I thought it was really the right time to basically put together a comprehensive, easy to read, 150 page, piece that could be digested by a couple of different groups. And so, who are the kind of target audiences, as you mentioned? One, definitely students. They are the future and the future generations. And right now, at most of the universities are supply chain majors and even degrees that are being offered in productions, operations management, and supply chain and global transport and logistics. So that's a group that needs to learn more and know more about it. Then it's consumers, people who just say, hey, this cup of coffee is really expensive. Why? I don't understand supply chain. I don't know what this is all about. And they want to pick up some kind of an easy read or a good cake that's written in a relatable voice to really kind of get a comprehension on that. And that's another audience. And then I would basically put it to business people. People in business who they are either interacting with the concept of supply chain or someone within their leadership says, hey, you need to know more about this industry or the supply chain space because it impacts us in A, B, C, and D. And they're looking for some kind of a backbone to really be able to foster knowledge and questions and understand and even connect to what they do. And then finally, the last group is the supply chain industry itself. And the reason why I say that is because there are so many practitioners, whether you're on the technology side or on the transport side or on the procurement side or the customs clearance side or different aspects of it. And the professionals in the supply chain industry for so many years have been very siloed because they just operate within their part of the chain. And my experience has always been to be more holistic, the entire supply chain, because our main targets have been to help sort of small to mid-sized businesses who don't have the capabilities or resources to build supply chains, to manage supply chains. So we always had to be practitioners, holistic practitioners. And that's what gave me this holistic perspective. And I think that that's valuable as well to, again, supply chain professionals who have only seen things through a very particular lens. So that's really the four kind of big three or four main targets for this book.
I love the idea of having the student as a target inside this book. It's like the cheat code or the cliff notes for their degree in terms of being able to use a book like this. And like you said, you've got it condensed into 150 pages, but decades of experience of wins and challenges inside of the supply chain. And then you touched on this because I didn't go through the whole list. Being an end-to-end service organization, you're going basically raw material or minerals in the ground, so to speak, all the way to product on the shelf or on the tables. And that takes a significant amount of time and energy to learn and years to do that. Now you're consulting in that space of organization. So I come from a manufacturing background. And as much as I wanted to know about supply chain was just to make sure that I put the order in the system and it showed up at my back dock ready to be manufactured. But as you do that consulting in the supply chain space now, do you have a story that kind of really rings in you of a success that you've worked with a client and really helped them out to either minimize risk inside of that space or cut lead time that they were trying to do that you really like to talk about?
Yeah, well, basically, it's that every day. Every day, because essentially we've always sold on the non-sexy stuff. And the non and that I think is super important because in this industry, for a long time, it was, hey, how can I get things made in the far corners of the earth for just nothing, for a very low cost, and not really care too much otherwise. But the reality of it is that when you really are looking to build supply chains, you're looking to have a proper requirements analysis upfront. You need to understand a client, what are their challenges, efficiency, quality, timeliness, deliverables. What is it that they are really facing the biggest challenge with? And then how are you going to basically create a new or a better way that's not disrupted, that's resilient, that can basically weather these uncontrollable ideas that we talked about or challenges? I mean, to pull out one is so hard to do.
Yeah.
I mean, what I find very exciting, though, just to say of general interest, is when we're able to connect the dots that businesses themselves can't see. They don't, because they've just been so focused on how they put one foot in front of the other, that they didn't realize that, they're burning too fast or they're not really operating in the most efficient manner and they just don't know what they don't know. So when you come and you are able to kind of show a new or a unique way or an opportunity, you really become a strategist. And that's really, I think, what we are more than anything else. We're really strategists who look at opportunities and say, hey, you're coming to us talking about this thing. But the reality of it is your business has this and this and this and this challenges. do you know that if we go this way and that way, that we could basically resolve all these challenges and do this thing you're talking about? And then you just have a client for life. And not only a client, but really a partner for life. Because these supply chains are the lifeblood of so many businesses. And I just kind of give you one example. We do a lot in the spirits and beverage industry. We have over 450 spirits and beverage clients. Well, one client comes to mind for me where the initial idea that they came to us with is they said, look, we're getting this glass bottles, we're getting them made in Mexico. It takes us months and months to get them. And, when we get them, they're not good quality and we're not happy. And they're basically putting us out of business. The supply chain part is putting us out of business. And could you help us come in, be more turnkey and grow our operations? Well, not only did we do that, not only did we reduce their costs and make them more efficient and increase their sales by 5 and 10 and 20 and 100 times over in very short periods of time, but then we started looking at these other ways that we could help them with their packaging and then moved into their machinery, their actual production line, where we started building, fully automated depalletizers and then rinsers that would invert these bottles on a production line and spray them and throw them down a heat tunnel and then would fill them and then cap them. They were doing a lot of this stuff by hand. And so again, scale and challenges with regards to how their business was operating. It started with an initial conversation around a particular product and a particular SKU and a disruption they were facing. And in the end, now I can say that that company, let's call it 5 or 7 years from when we started, is probably 1,000 times bigger than they were when we first came to them with very little disruptions and very little challenges. And that was, again, because we were able to connect those dots that they themselves, didn't even see or didn't even think about in the beginning stages. And that's how it happens with so many of these clients that, we start with a particular conversation and then it just kind of grows and morphs and we provide the value that they desperately need.
Kareem, you just touched on it. And folks, I hope you're listening and kind of go back through and not just take a supply chain lens with what he just talked about. Understanding and working with your customers or your clients, understanding the specific problem that they want to solve before you go in there and try and sell them another 20 to 30 solutions. Help them solve one problem, provide value to them, gives you ultimately the trust and the respect that you need to get more opportunities within that client. And you use the word scaling inside of that. You're absolutely right. I mean, if too many times, we can go in, in your space, you can go in and see 30 things wrong as soon, but they didn't call you in for 30 things. They call you in to look at one problem for them. And the way you earn your way into the other 10, 20, 30 problems is to solve that one for them specifically, provide value to them, and they'll continue to come to you. I love that story, Kareem, as you go forward. Look, on the other side of that, being a successful entrepreneur, being a successful global leader, okay, there's a cost to that. We often talk about this as the holistic leader in the term of balance in your life. How do you balance the demands of a global career, such as global supply chain, with your personal needs with regards to your health and wellness and things like that?
Well, if the machine's broken, you can't help anybody, right? And that's
Mhm.
just the simple philosophy there. And you have to really have your priorities straight. So for me, I grew up in a very strong family network, and I want to have that for my family too. So, I've got 2 kids. And we have dinner with each other every single night, and that's the time and I think that's a lost tradition in the world today, unfortunately, due to technology and being pulled in a million different directions. But we don't do that. Everyone sits down, no phones at the table. This is the time where we're going to start talking about what your day was like and what my day was like and what you're dealing with and everything else. And that's important. So, I always make the time for that. And then as well, to help with the homework and all these other kinds of things. And then you have to have the ability to blow off steam. That's super important as well. In my business, I could work 24 hours a day and still never work enough. I'm working multiple time zones. Remember, I'm working on the Asia side.
Hmm.
When people are asleep here, they're awake and vice versa. And the work could never stop for me unless you draw some very particular boundaries. And you say, all right, I got to see my family. I got to basically spend some time, keeping myself healthy, playing some sports or playing some music or enjoying things like that. And then at the same time, being able to just, find time to sleep. You got to have some sleep in there too, which is super important. So you have to draw lines. You have to draw lines. And as an entrepreneur, that's one of the hardest things to do because you're driven, you're ambitious, you know that you're going home with the successes and failures of your own every single day, right? It's not like you're punching in and punching out. I mean, you have to do that. Where do I sort of make the concessions? Well, I don't get a chance to, sit down and watch Netflix that often. I don't get a chance to sometimes during holiday season here be able to fully relax because things are happening on the other part of the world. And when things are happening on the other part of the world that aren't happening here, vice versa too. So that's the one thing that's the biggest challenge, I think, is that you're never fully disconnected as
Hmm.
an entrepreneur, especially if you care and you have staff. I've got employees here and internationally and so on. They have families, and there's an obligation. You have to have a level of an obligation to your team because without them, then you can't do a good job either. So it's a unique balancing act for sure, but you have to have the key things in place that are important to you. For me, that's family. That's spending some time sleeping and relaxing and being able to also, just enjoy life in general too. Because in the end, what are you doing it for, right?
Yeah. Those boundaries are so important. Ultimately, the one of the first things I do when I'm coaching individuals is say, "Show me your calendar," right, and where you're putting your time. That's what's there. When you put those big rocks in first, we've seen that video before. In terms of family, to your point, self care and fun to be able to be there, so that you don't burn out in a row. I mean, as you say that in terms of that global and the multiple time zones, I can certainly understand how the clock would never be turned off for you. You
Nope.
want to have meetings with multiple time zones. Very much a challenge. One of the things that I know I used to have as a challenge in manufacturing before I got into entrepreneurship world as well is when I started to travel. I knew things were getting really tough if I spent 12 or 13 nights a month in a hotel bed somewhere else with my head.
Oh,
And I mean,
yeah.
I knew things started to go south, and it forces you to really think about how things are going and make changes. And I did. I made a change into a career that because I put family first in that case, and it's something that I don't look back on
No, of
as what I
course.
missed.
You'll never
Definitely.
look back and say I didn't work enough. You
No,
will look
that's right.
back and say I didn't spend that time with that
Yep,
person or in that situation for sure.
absolutely. You just do not want that regret. I want to go one of your philosophies in leadership. I heard this, and I think, folks, I'm going to put a link to Kareem's Instagram account. I think he's a great follow on Instagram. But you had a philosophy in leadership that you talked about, and it may be in your book as well. I'm not sure if I saw it, but the last mile in supply chain is the first concern. Tell
Yep.
me a little bit about that, and frankly, relate that to leadership as well for me.
Sure. So when we are dealing with the supply chain, we're looking at so many facets and aspects of that, right? You're talking about prototyping and development and manufacturing and oversight and quality control and getting it on a vessel and then customs clearance and delivery and so forth. But the reality of it is, and what so many people don't really pay as much attention to is the delivery side. And the fact that the last mile, that last part where those goods get picked up from that port and delivered to that client's door, if that doesn't happen, everything else that happened beforehand didn't even matter. Didn't matter how well you did it or anything else. Didn't matter if you were on time with the factory and it made the vessel and it did all these other things. None of it matters unless the fact that it actually delivered to the doorstep of the client around the time they needed it and wanted it and that it was right. Right. So that last mile has to be your first concern. And so many situations in business I've seen where that last part gets botched up
Hmm.
and everything that happened before that was well done is just completely discounted. So how do you relate that to leadership? Well, I think the way you relate that to leadership is by basically looking at what are your goals and objectives? Because technically speaking, the goals and objectives, the goal is that last mile. It is that delivery to that client site, whatever that goal may be for you, and then backtracking into making sure that you're on a correct pathway to line yourself up so that you can achieve that last mile or achieve that goal or objective that you're focusing in on uh, for your leadership planning. So that's how I would link that together. That sometimes we have to look at where we want to end up to then be able to determine how we're going to get there.
Hmm.
And that's kind of some of this idea here.
No, I like it and touching it that way because if we don't finish, right, it's got to be one of those you got to bring it across the finish line. If you don't finish well, the entire process, ultimately may not be given the due that it's worth. You mentioned all those things all the way up to that last point, and to not finish it strong as a leader, whether you're dealing with people or you're dealing with customers, or you're doing something at home and or you're going through a fitness program, whatever that is, that last mile is the big concern. The running a marathon, however you want to look at it. So I love the correlation there, but I like that quote. The last mile is the first concern to make sure it just doesn't matter. Just like delivering a meal at a restaurant, it just doesn't matter. Kareem, thanks for sharing that, and I appreciate the correlation. Uh, Self-proclaimed in your bio, continuous learner. Look, your industry is constantly going through upheaval, technology changing, delivery methods changing, drones, AI, whatever you want to end up going through that. How do you give me a discipline or two that you use to stay current in your industry so you can be providing the best value to your clients?
Well, first and foremost, you have to pay attention to what's happening, around you. That's for sure. You can't be an ostrich. You can't kind of have your head dug in the sand and not paying attention to what's going on around in the world, because how are you going to be able to be responsive and reactive if what you are presenting or trying to solve for is technically irrelevant? So you need to basically be always looking around your current events as well as getting a perspective for the future. And then outside of that, I think what it really comes down to is questioning things and having a level of curiosity about the world around you. So I'll give you a perfect example when you mentioned AI and so forth. I've written about this. I write for some different tier one publications, and I wrote about this in USA Today, where I wrote about, the pitfalls and the dangers of AI. So many people are heralding this as, the greatest thing ever, and it's amazing, and it's going to solve all of our problems and so forth. But I always look at it in terms of what are we going to lose? What do we lose by this? When relying solely on Chat GPT to write this because instead of taking an hour, it takes 5 seconds to do it. Where is the Shakespeare is going to be? Where is the creative writing going to be, and the struggle to find that right word to fit that particular instance, because that's what needed to be done. And the journey is the real benefit, not always just the final outcome. And, I just get worried about the fact that if we're so outcome driven all the time, as opposed to process driven, that we may lose something along the way, even in scenarios where we make mistakes that end up being, some of the greatest, miracles of our time. We think about like the discovery of penicillin, right? That was an accident, but in the end, what benefits did that bring to humanity and to the world of health? So, and so many things like that too. So, I think that idea of being a continuous learner comes with, paying attention to what's around you, thinking about the future, questioning what is happening around you in that future, and then coming up with your own independent thoughts on how you're going to basically develop and grow and morph from there. That's being a learner and then being an engaged person, I think.
Being a learner, absolutely very important. Being a learner is reading books as well. Leaders are readers. Your book, Supply Chain Ups and Downs. I want to ask you about a book test. Somebody reads your book. They usually mention the different folks who would be reading it, and they sit it on a shelf, just like the shelf behind me. A lot of books that get read and just get put up on a shelf and not paid any attention to. But somebody reads your book, and a year later, they see your book up on the shelf. What do you want them to think, and what do you want them to do when they see your book?
I would love them to look at it and say, wow, I learned a lot from that. That was a small book, but wow, I learned a lot. And the other thing is, I want them to think about some of the concepts that I promoted in the book. So outside of just kind of talking about my time in the trenches and my thoughts and ideas, I actually promote a economic theory, which is supply chain socioeconomics, that I talk about in this book that no one really has talked about. And this discusses the idea that equilibrium is achieved through not achieving equilibrium. and that basically that there are divergent interests and non-alignment of goals of the different players in the supply chain. Take, for example, suppliers and manufacturers, and how manufacturers want to just kind of get things out quick, and the customer wants to have it done perfectly. And there's quality standard differences. There's pricing differences, right? One group wants to maximize profits and increase costs. The other side wants to reduce their costs and increase their profits. There's a push and a pull, and this creates economic momentum between these different links within the supply chain. So this is this concept of supply chain socioeconomics that I introduced. And I also talk about, some really interesting sort of diagrams that I created. I created something called the PPI pyramid, which is the procurement, production, inventory pyramid. And it's basically a holistic way to look at the way the supply chain works, with supply and demand being inversely correlated, and taking a journey along this PPI pyramid with the micro steps that are involved. So yeah, I tried to create some very nice visuals and very easily understandable ideas to really put it in the minds of people, so that when they come back or they see that book and say, oh yeah, I remember that. That book had that really cool chart in there that explained a lot, or that economic theory was really kind of cool. Or, these ideas that Kareem mentions about sustainability, or about nearshoring, or about AI, which I do talk about in the last 3 chapters of the book, are relevant today as they were, a year ago when I read it. So, my hope is that it stays and that it has relevance for a long time to come.
Good. Kareem, the opportunity for folks to find your book, of course, it's on Amazon. Is there anywhere else that you would send them for the book and or to follow you and stay in touch with you?
Absolutely. So supplychainupsanddowns.com is the website for the book itself. It has a lot of nice information and so on, and that's where you can get the book. As far as I'm concerned, I mean, I'm on all the different social media platforms. My main website for my personal philosophy and leadership is KERIMKFURI.com. LinkedIn is always really great. We use Facebook, Instagram, X, all of the different platforms, as I said. And then for any kind of, supply chain related solutions that a business may have, or questions that they have about the supply chain industry, my main company is theatlasnetwork.com. So those are some different links, and some places where people can find me, or kind of see what we're up to these days.
Excellent. I can put those links in the show notes as well. I would encourage you to listeners to go out and follow Kareem on social media. Kareem Kaffouri, you've shared with us some fantastic wisdom over the years, some fun stories that go along with that, and how it can impact the leaders of the Uncommon Leader podcast. I appreciate you investing the time today to do that. I'm going to finish you off and give you the last word. Again, the same way I finish all my guests, I'm going to give you a billboard. You can put it anywhere you want to, and you're a global guy. It doesn't matter to me where you put it. Make it digital, whatever you want to do. LED, doesn't matter. But you're going to put a message on that billboard. What's the message you're going to put on that billboard for folks to see, and why do you put that message on there?
The message would be global citizenship. And the reason why I will put that on there is because I think that we've never been in a time in our society like we are today, where the world has been as small as it is due to technology. And we really need to be more connected to each other now more than ever. And unfortunately, I think that that is not completely the case. I think that whether it's different interests, or beliefs, or politics, continue to separate us on this planet in a time where we need to be coming together more and more. And I've seen the beauty of global citizenship at work, because I work hand in hand with people from all over the world all the time. I can see the benefits and the beauty of cultural exchange and opportunities. And someone, everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. So I would say it's global citizenship, and that would be the message that I would put on any billboard anywhere on the planet.
Excellent. Kareem, once again, thank you for being such a great guest on the Uncommon Leader podcast. I wish you the best in the future.
Thank you so much, John. It was really great, and appreciate the thoughtful interview.